I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writer's Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality crime-related fiction. Welcome to episode 127. This week, I'm interviewing award-winning writer and director Matthew Gentile. We're talking about crime, directing, and we talk about his upcoming true crime thriller, the film American Murderer, which I had the privilege of helping him with a little bit. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Writer's Detective Bureau. My guest today is award-winning writer and director Matthew Gentile. I met Matthew during the creation of his upcoming feature film American Murderer, based on a 2004 robbery and murder committed by Jason Derek Brown, who remains at large as an FBI most wanted fugitive. Welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Thank you for having me, Adam. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so returning listeners and now viewers, since we're doing the YouTube thing of the podcast, will know that I rarely do interviews on the show. But Matthew and I got to know each other a little bit during the creation of American Murderer, and we both thought it would be kind of fun to talk a little bit about the process of bringing this story to the screen. So, in particular, what was it that drew you to this story, and how long ago did the process of bringing the story to the screen begin?
Well, it goes back quite a long time. So I was 14 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I was obsessed with the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list. So with this weird curiosity, I'd go on the website and I think maybe I could, help the FBI catch somebody. That was my juvenile fantasy. And right around the time I was 14, the murder and armored car robbery was committed. Jason was not a top 10 fugitive yet, but he was a fugitive, and he would become one shortly after that. But I remember seeing, on the top 10 most wanted list, you have really mean, menacing faces like Whitey Bulger, Osama bin Laden, tough-looking guys. And then there's a surfer dude with spiky blonde hair from Southern California who your first instinct just says, this guy doesn't really fit the profile of a criminal. So I remembered the face really standing out to me. So much so that cut to over a decade later, I'm graduating film school. I'm figuring out, trying to figure out what my first feature film is. I have a lot of people asking me that because I was in a very fortunate position where some short films I made were winning awards, getting me around town, getting me meetings, but I didn't have that first feature lined up. And so it was the big question. It was like, we love your short. What's your first feature? We love your short. What's your first feature? And I had a couple ideas, but none of them really seemed to be quite right. And, there was a project I was almost going to do. So it was kind of like a bit of an existential time where I was getting a lot of praise for something I did. And I also had no idea what I was going to do next. So I, one day I was storyboarding. I was doing a commercial that I was hired to do. And as I was storyboarding, I always have true crime documentaries on in the background or some kind of noise TV. And all of a sudden, as I'm drawing for the shoot, the face of Jason Derek Brown just popped on the screen, and I just saw it, and it was as if it just came rushing back, almost like muscle memory. I just was like, oh my god, this guy is still missing. And so I turned the volume up and I started to watch. And what was really interesting about, because Jason's story has been covered on multiple newspapers, media shows like Dateline, American Greed, all those kinds of true crime stuff, ID Discovery. He's been everywhere. It's a very widely covered story. But this piece I saw, in particular, interviewed people who knew him, the FBI agent detective who hunted him. And I started to see that there was something really interesting about the story. I mean, on the one hand, it resembled on the surface to me the kinds of movies I grew up loving. The film that made me want to be a filmmaker was Dog Day Afternoon with Al Pacino. I saw that when I was 12. Father showed it to me too young, but I loved the movie. I loved the hostage negotiator. I loved all the elements. But I loved the character of Sonny, even though he does something really horrendous and despicable. The first scene of the movie, he's putting a gun in people's faces, but I found myself sad for him at the end when he gets caught. And so those are the kinds of movies I loved. Movies with, gray morality, anti-heroes, whether it's like, film noir or The Godfather or Goodfellas. I always loved movies that kind of lived in that gray area. For a lot of kids my age, it was Pokemon and comic books. For me, it was gangsters and fugitives and outlaws. So it made sense that it kind of gripped me on this level. But what really became so fascinating to me about Jason Derek Brown's story wasn't so much him as it was the people he knew and who loved him and who saw all these other different sides of him. When I started hearing different people's accounts of what Jason was like, and this was really as I began researching it and doing like a very deep, immersive like look into like interviewing people, some of whom are composited into characters in the movie. I won't name who, but there were people I interviewed who were real. And who really knew him and gave me accounts. And I realized like Jason meant so many different things to so many different people. And once I really saw that, that's when I really started to see, oh, I think this could actually be a film that I would want to make and spend years of my life doing.
For sure. So given that we're dealing with a real story, what's the most challenging thing about working a true story like that?
Yeah, and I would say it's a great question. I would say that my, what I do, because I'm doing two other true crime films right now that I'm prepping to go next, is I call it true crime fiction. So it's based on a true crime. It is a true story. People who know the true story well of American Murderer have said to me they feel it's quite accurate in a lot of ways. There's some things, but overall, like it comes off pretty accurate. But I have to be clear off the record that there were absolutely a lot of liberties that I took to dramatize the story. Because the challenging thing is, and this tidbit comes from a mentor of mine, who I'm sure you've dealt with before, possibly, Billy Ray, who wrote the screenplay for Captain Phillips. And he said the reason he took that movie on was because it was the only time he ever read a true story that actually played out completely like an action movie. Like the story itself just played out that way naturally. That was very rare to find. And so, I agree with him that a lot of real life events don't play out like movies, and you need to dramatize things. You need to make, so, when you do a deep immersive research process, like I or a lot of filmmakers do, and I know you do when you write your scripts, like it, there's a lot of stuff that might be super interesting because there were so many fascinating anecdotes I had about Jason Derek Brown, like infinite. And there was a version of the script that was like, 180 pages that had all of these side stories that ended up that I thought were really interesting. And as I really worked the script, had to really sculpt. It's kind of like you start with a huge block of marble and you sculpt down to the tiny little elephant right in the middle of the thing. And so that was kind of like, research is great, but it's also a great way to procrastinate from actually writing anything. So, I think as I really went through many drafts, and, keep in mind the screenplay was developed beyond, like at first it was just me writing it on spec, which is how most of my projects start. And, I occasionally do rewrite jobs, but mostly it's been me originating my own stuff. And then the producers come in and the company comes in, they get involved. And then you start having to, show them the menu, right? Present them with something that actually works. And it was in doing that really made, I think, the screenplay evolve and become, what it did, become the movie that it did. So, I think just, lots of research, but then also being able to kind of chuck it, to have the freedom to invent things or restructure things. And I found that in inventing things, I actually got closer to the truth in ways I didn't realize. There were some scenes that I just imagined what would happen. Then I would find out later that is how it played out, or more or less. So, it becomes a thing where I think research can be, I think if you use it right so that it's liberating, that's kind of key, rather than it be like something you just, get too stuck on and be like, no, it has to happen this way. Because I think, to make a movie, you have to make a drama, because I wouldn't even call our movie a docudrama, right? I would call it a true crime thriller based on true events. So, I think having that freedom to jump off the real stuff and, make up what you need to make it a compelling story is kind of I think that's a challenge that a lot of people who do true stories face and have.
Yeah, for sure. If most of the listeners to this podcast are primarily writers themselves. And so this really speaks to the importance of story structure. And, even when you have the majority of the story kind of fitting an act structure, if you don't have those key elements, it's going to flop. So yeah, I think giving yourself that leeway to do the fictional stuff and that artistic license is really important.
Yeah, and that is a nice thing about true stories. I'm doing one right now about a bank robber. And it is nice to know because I used to be bigger into outlining than I am now. Because I find that outlining, sometimes I just spend so much time outlining, I don't actually write anything. So I've really become more of a dive in kind of guy where I just dive into the script and then I do the outlining after I do that quote unquote vomit draft, where I really, but right now, but the cool thing about doing true stories is you kind of do have those points. You kind of have the what they call like the 6 hooks, right? Like you've got an act one. If your character robs 10 banks, like naturally a structure will play out, and it was similar with this. There was kind of a structure, like the murder sequence was always the robbery was always the climax of the movie, more or less, or that end of act two. Like it was always going to be that. So that is something nice about true stories. And I would say if anyone's ever stuck, with writer's block, just write a true story because they'll give you the juice you need, and there's stuff you can spring off.
Sure, for sure. So in this movie, we've got Jason Derek Brown portrayed by the amazing Tom Pelphrey, who most listeners or viewers will recognize for his role as Ben Davis, the brother of Wendy Bird in Ozark on Netflix. And then he's opposite Ryan Phillippe's portrayal of FBI agent, special agent Lance Leising, the agent that's leading the hunt for Jason Derek Brown. And then you have, this is an incredible cast. I mean, I know you kind of think of this as, won't get into budget, but low budget to a certain extent. But man, I mean, the caliber of acting in this and the actors. I mean, you've got Idina Menzel, who she was freaking the voice of Elsa in Frozen, and then you got Jackie Weaver. It's just, and the list goes on. I realize this is really more of a casting director's job, but what kind of led to this incredible cast, especially given that this is kind of your first feature film outside of grad school?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for saying that. And yeah, I agree. It was a cast that I have to say exceeded my wildest imagination of what the cast could be. I had a lot, in Hollywood, we have lists. It's always lists of actors. And, they always say, like, be careful about writing a role for somebody because you're never going to get your top choice. And that is true to a certain extent. But, there was a lot of luck involved. There was a lot of, great players. First off, I did have an amazing casting director, Patricia DeSerto is her name. She's done Blue Jasmine, a lot of the great Woody Allen films. I know he's not in vogue right now, but the films he did with her and the casts she got for him were incredible. So she had a lot of, she had great ideas and resources, but there are a lot of filmmakers out there who would say, and I'm sure you've heard it before, that 80% of a movie is writing and casting. I think it's a Billy Wilder quote. And that other 20, and look, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like you could say 80% of a movie is anything. I've heard 80% sound and 80%,
Right.
cinematography or whatever. So, but writing and casting are definitely two super really crucial things that kind of set you up for success or not. And miscasting is the thing that is one of the few errors a filmmaker can make that you really cannot come back from. So it was very important to get it right. This cast was always going to fall around who played Jason. And that was kind of always the big question, was who we're going to get to play Jason Derek Brown. I was very excited about the possibilities. To be totally honest, Tom initially was not on any list I had. It was March 2020 when we set out to cast. We were kind of in the world had shut down. I think this is around the time you and I first started chatting, maybe a little bit before that, but close to that. And, we didn't really, we were kind of like, we were making some offers, we weren't really getting too far. And it didn't look like we were going to film, but I kind of just chose to believe in my gut that we were going to film that year. So I was prepping every day, like designing my shots and storyboarding and working with my team very closely, working with you, making sure the police procedural details were good. Like all of that. I was really trying to map out how we would do it when we got to do it, whether it was the end of 2020 or, 2021. I was like, we're going to do it. It's going to happen. Even though I really had, like I said, no reason to believe it. So one day in April, right when Ozark had dropped, my producer, Gia Walsh, called me and she said, "Hey, are you watching Ozark?" And I said, I'm not. And she said, "Well, you need to, because this guy, Tom Pelphrey, is incredible." And I said, "Okay." And I would get a call like this every week from someone being like, "This guy's incredible. That guy's incredible." So I was kind of like, "All right, cool. Tom Pelphrey on the list. Got it." Then 2 hours later, my brother texts me and he says the exact same thing. He's like, "Dude," and my brother, by the way, did the score for the film. So he was involved in the periphery at the time. And he was like, this guy, Tom Pelphrey, he seems like the guy. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then my friend who's a talent agent calls me and says the same exact thing. So I'm like, all right, I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll watch Ozark. And so I began watching it. And it was really funny because back when I was 16, I studied at Carnegie Mellon. I did a theater program for acting. There was a teacher who used to say to us, in the first 5 seconds, she was a tough teacher. Those directors, they know if you're going to get the part. They know 5 seconds. And we always looked like, we kind of like, me and the other kids would make fun of them. Like, yeah, 5 seconds, come on. How do they know anything? When I watched Tom, it was like 5 seconds and I knew. And I just said, oh my God, this is the guy. These people all said this for a reason. So I called Gia, my producer, up. I said, Gia, we got to get this guy. What do we do? I'll write a letter. Excuse me. I'll write a letter, whatever it takes. Let's get him. And so, we went out, we sent him the script. And at that time, we really had no idea if we would get him because he was getting a lot of heat off of Ozark, justifiably. His performance was through the roof and everyone knew it. And so the chances of him coming to do a little indie movie in that time when he's getting that much heat was not necessarily high. But fortunately for us, he and I met a couple of times. We really got on. We really clicked and connected. He had some concerns about the script that I talked to him about, the character, and more, not so much about the writing of the script, but how we were going to do it, if we were going to do it together. And so we talked and we connected, and, we started like talking about the script, and I started making some little adjustments, to make it tailor it right for him. And sure enough, pretty quickly he attached, and that was in the summer. And once he attached, the rest of the cast kind of came together pretty quickly. The second big piece was Ryan Phillippe saying yes to the role of Leising, which, I was saying I didn't expect. I never thought we'd get somebody of that caliber to play that part. But Ryan was really excited about the screenplay, and, was a great, incredible collaborator to work with, and just really, kind of almost like a bit of a mentorish relationship. You have to keep in mind, like he's been acting for as long as I've been alive, basically,
right.
Even though he looks younger than me. And so, Ryan has stories about working with Robert Altman and Clint Eastwood and Tony Scott. So, he really believed in me and took a shot doing a first time director's movie, as did Tom, as did all of them. Jackie Weaver, when she joined the cast, I remember a year before when we were in development on the script, like one of the producers said, if you write this role really well, if we could get Jackie Weaver, someone like Jackie Weaver. And I was like, yeah, right. It's a small part. She's never going to do this. Are you guys crazy? But, keep in mind, we filmed November 2020. So at this time, everyone was at home.
Right.
And they were eager to work. And so, I don't want to, there was so much preparation that went into this movie, but all movies getting made, especially these days, there's a huge element of luck involved. And the fact that, we were going out to film it in this specific time, and all these actors were available, I highly doubt any other time they would have been, because Idina Menzel, she travels all the time. And since we wrapped shooting, Tom, all of them, Tom, Ryan, Idina, Jackie, they have all not stopped. Chantel, Van Santon, who plays his sister and is fabulous.
Yeah, she's awesome.
These guys do not stop working. Like they have booked show after show, movie after movie. This cast is like, so yeah, it was really stacked. And I, felt that as a first-time director, I had to rise up to that level, and push myself to be, at their, to meet their level. But they were really great. I mean, there were no divas. There was no difficult people on the set. It was a really harmonious, creative environment. And I think part of that came from the fact that we all felt very lucky to be getting to make something in that time. And that also wasn't just the cast, that was also in the crew. It was a lot of people's first job back in a while. So you really felt that through everyone. And I think it shows up in the final film, but who knows?
Yeah, it definitely does. I was actually going to ask, because you mentioned being in school and learning about, within 5 seconds, but then also you have this incredible cast. What's it like directing? Well, I was going to ask what it's like directing such a talented cast, but do you feel like you've developed a particular style for directing? Or directing talent in particular, especially when it feels like it's so heavily stacked on the veteran side of things?
Yeah, casting correctly, whatever level you're at, and I've worked with actors of all levels now, new, established, anywhere in between. And on this movie, there were a lot of actors, what they call them day players in the cast, who had never acted, some of them never acted before, and who played like the local color characters, like, that filled in that atmosphere and environment. Like some of them were complete non-actors. So with this film and before, I've worked with a variety of levels. And I think it is always kind of the same. The only thing is that every actor has a different way.
Sure.
And part of your job as a director, I think, is to figure that out. Hopefully you have some rehearsal time. That really helps me. So I do have a method. Once the script is done and I'm working with them, what I like to do, both of my shorts, and I did it here as well. I had to do it on Zoom because we didn't have the luxury of having a rehearsal space before the shoot. Everyone kind of came when they could, and we're in bubbles. So we did a lot of Zoom rehearsals. And, really, I try to not so much work out how every scene's going to be exactly or anything like that, but I really try to make sure that I cast relationships, and then I work with the actors on the relationships. So I would do a Zoom day with Tom and Adina, and we would go over all their scenes and see the progression of it all throughout the movie, and really go through each and give them a chance to hear it out, to try it out, to do the broad strokes, question things, because actors will often sometimes, if a line is too screenwritery, right. Or, is too sounding one way in your head and doesn't sound natural, that's a chance for them to bring it up. And it's better to do it there than on set, although sometimes that happens too. And and that's part of the job, especially being a writer director, is you have to kind of be able to rewrite on the fly. But I would do that pretty often, and let the actors also ad lib and improvise sometimes. And that would give you some gold, that you could sort through when you're editing. But, my method was always, to really work with the actors and sculpt it kind of in the room. And more, for me, it's about asking questions. I really don't believe in telling actors how to feel ever. So I would never say to an actor hey, you're really sad here. Or, you'd be you really, you should feel, the one thing they taught us at AFI was never say, be sexy. If you're doing a sexy scene, never say be sexy, be sexier. But there are directors that do stuff like that. And I have a great mentor named Judith Weston, who wrote, in my opinion, a book that every film person should read, called Directing Actors. Because the book has so much wisdom, not just for directing, but also for screenwriting. Andrew Stanton has been a big advocate for her. Billy Ray, a lot of Ava DuVernay, I think, was one of her students. And I am too. And Judith Weston, she's an oracle. She's just an absolute genius at what she does. And she really talks about characters, relationships, spines, arcs. And she really always would get to the core of her big thing she always says, ask questions to actors. So, if an actor says well, I don't really think I would say this, you might be well, or why do you feel, why do you think that, right? Why do you feel he wouldn't wear that shirt? Well, what shirt would you like? Because if you ask questions, you're kind of giving the actor permission. And I think that's the big key. Is I think the most important thing, I won't take credit for any performance in the movie because it's all these actors, but you look at Tom Pelphrey in this film and he's very unhinged, and it's an unhinged character. And so I can't take credit for that man's brilliance. He had, it was very clear when I saw him in the first Zoom rehearsal, I was already oh my God, this is good. And he would look at me and be dude, this is 8% of what I can do. I need to get on set. And it totally made sense. But, if I could take credit for anything at all, it would be giving him the space, the sandbox that he can go and do that. And that's what I think a director's job is. It's setting your actors up so that they can be vulnerable and reveal themselves in front of a camera. Because it's, it is hard. You got a camera in your face. You got a crew of 50 people or 100 people, in our case more like 50, watching you. You've got a director wanting something out of you. And it's a challenging thing. There's a reason why when they're really good, they get paid a lot, right? And treated a certain way. And that's why I call them movie stars, because they can do a thing that very, very few people can. And it's very challenging. But, like I said, I think it was just about giving the actors that space so that they could do that, and really being there to guide them. There's a great Krzysztof Kieslowski quote about directing, great director, who said that the director's job is to help everyone. It's not how you necessarily think of directing a lot of time when you think of certain filmmakers' reputations. They may not seem like they do that, but it's really allowing them all to do their best and making sure each cast member has a chance to shine. But it's very amenable, and I try to rest on my intuition with it. I don't overthink it with actors, because then the last thing you want is an actor thinking, too much about what they're doing or getting in their head. And that was something I had to learn. Sometimes I would, because I had so much research on it. There was, Chantel is an actor who wants to know everything about everything. She wants to know like what shirts, the person wore, what, like, where they got it, like where they go shopping, whereas Tom is very much more like, I just want to do it. And so, adjusting to that, making sure like, okay, so Chantel, I can really wax about the history and tell her everything. She'll want to know it. And with Tom, it'd be like, all right, I'll just stop at, cool, just do your thing, go on, so it's always adjusting to different ways of working, and they are all different, even though some of them seem similar, they all require something.
Interesting. So as both the writer, writing the spec script all the way to the point of being the director, from the first draft of the script to the final cut going out to the world, what's your favorite part of the movie making process?
Great question. I don't want to be lame and say all of it, but there are pleasures and disadvantages to all of it, right? I mean, Vince Gilligan famously once said, I think he said, writing is more satisfying or gratifying, but directing is more fun. And, I don't know. I mean, when you write and direct a movie, you're really tied to it. And when you choose to direct a movie, but, sometimes like they say that the director will always get all of the credit and all of the blame. So, sometimes like someone could write a script and they'd be like, oh, well, this director completely screwed it up. But when you write and direct, there's no way around it. So, whether your listeners love or hate my movie, you can blame me. But, I think there are pleasures to all. I'll say a little bit about everyone. Writing is, probably what the hardest for me, takes me the longest. And I think with writing, it's always about forcing myself to just do it, because I think you just got to, it is honestly 90% of it's just having the courage to just face that blank page, write that first bad draft, get through it, and then start revising for however long it takes to get it to be.
Do you have a particular writing process, like a time of day or anything that you do in particular?
I've tried out many over the years since I graduated film school, and I'll share the one that has worked for me. And that is 6 a.m. when I wake up. And not saying everyone has to wake up at 6 a.m. A lot of people don't, but 6 a.m. I literally now, I've done since I finished the film. I do not do anything else. I just sit down at the chair and I write for an hour and a half. And I try to do 3 to 5 pages, even if they're bad. Just write them, get them down. Because, the day picks up always, but especially these days with like, doing interviews or promoting a movie or taking meetings or whatnot. So I always try to do it early in the morning before like emails come in, phone calls come in, my mom texts me a picture of the dog back home in New York, anything, so that I just sit down and get it done. Because I think it's very easy to convince yourself not to write. I can always think of 27,000 excuses. Like, I should go to the gym now. I had to do that errand at the post office and I just won't write. I don't write. But I think getting used to writing every single day is something that I think is very important for screenwriters, and including myself, because it's very easy to not write and get paralyzed in analysis. So I do just try to turn out pages, I call it fresh pages, like a baker, every morning, without exception. That's including weekends. That's been my new thing. And I find that really works for me, because doing that, I've generated many more scripts. Now, before that, I was very much a precious guy who like always focused on one project at a time. And I'm learning now, that's been my new learning curve after getting this movie made, is that I, to keep up with what's going on here, you kind of have to be juggling multiple projects at once. And that's a hard lesson to learn. It was because for getting American Murder Made, it was all about that. And now it's like, okay, you have one, but you want to do another, and you have to have the next one ready. And so it's a constant juggling act. But I think just accepting that it's always, likely your script will always fall somewhat short of what you hoped it would be in any draft. Even if it's the 10th draft, you probably, unless you're someone who's just really satisfied with your work, which I'm just not ever. So, your script will always fall short. So understanding, embracing that it's only going to get better if you keep working on it, and just having the fortitude to just be like, yeah, I'm going to go with it. That's the thing that becomes the hardest for me. So that's what I'd say about my writing routine.
Awesome.
But writing I love, and I would say there were kind of 4 phases distinct. Writing, prep, which was quite long. Shooting was the only fast thing about American Murder. Film production was fast. And that was a ton of fun. and also extremely hard. 27 locations, 22 shooting days. Really, a lot of action elements, like things that a first-time director normally probably doesn't do. It's more, if I was more intelligent, I probably wouldn't have. Um, but I think so shooting was kind of like a sprint, and writing and editing, which I think may be my favorite part, were a marathon, because editing is hard and challenging. It takes a long time, and it becomes some but you're really finding the movie and shaping it. And it is the final rewrite. It's really your final chance to get everything right. And there is a magic about putting shots together and seeing how the story forms and figuring things out, and discovering new things or new transitions or new ideas. So if I had to pick one, I think I'd probably pick editing. And I think a lot of directors say that because Scorsese has a quote about editing where he says it's the only part of film that's unique to film. It's the only part of filmmaking, like, because writing kind of came from playwriting and like novel writing. Directing kind of came from theater a little bit, or painting, or photography. Cinematography came from photography, but editing is truly idiosyncratic and unique to just film. And so I kind of see what he means by that. So yeah, I love editing.
Yeah, with my personal transition with this podcast going into YouTube, I've actually started learning quite a bit about editing, and it has caused me to go back and watch some movies that I've loved from more of like the editor's viewpoint, right?
Yeah.
Went back and watched Blade Runner 2049, and it was just like a whole new experience. Like once you learn about the editing styles and what that editing really means.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Great movie too.
Yeah, and I was a huge fan of the first one. I mean, that was one of the
Yeah.
first movies that I remember watching over and over as a kid. Again, like you, way too young to have watched it in the early
Right.
80s, but yeah, it was fascinating. So,
Yeah.
for those writers that either want to get into screenwriting or want to adapt their novels into screenplays, what advice could you offer them for either breaking into the business or increasing the chances of their book getting made into a film?
Hmm. That's a great question. Um, Advice for screenwriters, probably what I could do better than, say, someone wants to turn their book into a movie. Although, I mean, I think it's all the same. Um, you know, I think number one is writing every day. I think, or making sure you're churning out material is important. Getting feedback on it, seeing what people are really saying about it. People who are honest with you, and will give you their honest thoughts on how you can improve. Because you don't want yes people who are like, oh my god, this is amazing. Because that doesn't, like, saying like my girlfriend and my mom liked it doesn't necessarily get you too far. But you also don't want people who are overly, because there can be some people who will like tear you to shreds, and that's not great either. So I think you got to find the right, finding a community. Something I just recently heard, I'm going to steal from a little bit, is there's some people try to I hate the term networking. I think it's like one of the stupidest terms, but it is important to meet people and to know people in the industry. But I think a lot of people try to go up. They try to network to the top. They're like, I want to meet the top person at this agency so I can get an agent, or I want to go to the studio and meet the top person there. And I think actually, because the way I came in, I went to college in Connecticut, and I moved. At first I worked at William Morris Endeavor in the mailroom, and I was with 10 other people my age who were also what they called floating assistants, where we worked in the mailroom together. And this was about a little over a decade ago, 2012, when I graduated college, and that was what I did before I came to AFI film school there. And working in the mailroom, I made probably 20 to 30 friends, acquaintances, people, who all work in the industry now, or at least most of them do. Not all of them are talent agents, but a lot of them, some of them, are working at studios. Some of them are in TV development. Some of them are in film development. Some of them are in film finance. So, I think the moral of that story, and then going to AFI, you meet a lot of, I was able to meet a lot of filmmakers around my age, or a little older or a little younger, and, form this group that kind of came, my cinematographer on my film was the class below me. My editors were the class below and 2 years below me. So, and I've worked with people who are years above me. So, I think the moral of the story is network horizontally, not vertically. I think it's a Duplass Brothers quote. because a lot of people are like, oh my God, I got to get to the top of the tree and I got to meet someone there. And the odds are, and might not always be the case, but the person at the top of the tree probably doesn't want to talk to you, until you're really like heating up. They probably want to talk to someone who's already A-list. So I think when you're starting out, networking horizontally and tapping into that. So, if you're a writer, it's a little different because if you're a writer, really all you have to do is write and make sure your material is really good, and then if you're halfway competent at like talking to people, you'll be able to find people who can get your stuff passed around, right? Because when something is really good and really strong, it stands out because there's so much bad or mediocre stuff out there. Even at the top levels, even at the top agencies, there's bad. People would be surprised. So good material tends to stand out pretty fast, and there's so many ways now that one could, one of my side hustles that I did pretty much all through the making of American Murder was I was a script reader on sites, and I can't say which ones because it was secret under secret terms, but there's so many great sites like and competitions like Nickel. Although be careful of competitions because some of them are really scammy. I would if you're going to submit to a competition, I would do like Nickel, maybe the Coppola one. There are good ones but there are ones that just are money sucks, and so I'd be wary of some. But screenwriting competitions, like certainly the top ones can help if So the good material does tend to stand out. It's not always the case. Sometimes things get buried, but when a good or great script is around and it's commercially viable, people tend to notice. So I would say just keep doing the work is the most important thing, because you can network all you want, you can meet everybody in town, but if you don't have a good script, nobody's going to care. Or even sometimes, by the way, good also doesn't mean sellable, unfortunately. There are a lot of, not great scripts that are commercial and a lot of great scripts that aren't. But I think, I'm a believer in write what you're passionate about, because I think when you try to write to fit a market, some people do it and good on them. But I believe, because if you write something that's a great sample, maybe, and it's not, say, necessarily the most commercial idea, well, if the writing is really good, some agent or manager might read that and then they might say, oh, I want to hire that guy to write, or a woman to write something for, Focus, So I think writing stuff and trying to do great work is always priority number one. And then I think meet people who are at your level and who are in your ecosystem so that you can kind of together rise up. Because that's what's something that I will say has been really fun to see on my journey. And I am absolutely an emerging filmmaker at most. But I have a group of people who are kind of coming up with me, and around me, and I'm seeing it, that a lot of people in my age group are kind of in some interesting places or similar places. And so I think that there's something nice about that, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key with the networking, as you mentioned with the horizontal thing, is really looking at it from the long game, right? Where are you all going to be 10, 15 years from now? Rather than just that immediate gratification of who's going to help me today. And then also just going into it, rather than looking to receive something, but just kind of what can you offer and how can you help, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Matthew, and congratulations on the success of American Murderer. I know you've already won a few awards at film festivals for it. Where and when can people check out the film?
The film will be out October 21st in select theaters, and it'll be out the 28th, October 28th, digital on demand. So they can rent it on any transactional video on demand platform on their TV, smartphones. So please watch it on TV, but you can watch it on a smartphone too. Anywhere or tablets, anywhere you can rent it, iTunes Store, Amazon, all of them.
Awesome. And where can people go to learn more about you?
They can follow me on Instagram at Matthew L. Gentile, and also my website, MatthewGentileDirector.com, where I update things fairly regularly. I got to get better about it, but it's also a way to contact me too. So if you want to write me, that's the best way.
Perfect. And no unsolicited manuscripts for him.
No, I can't take those. I have too many projects going on, but I can answer questions. I just might be a little slow.
Awesome. All right. So check out American Murderer and help us bring Jason Derek Brown to justice. Thanks so much for being here, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Adam, this was a pleasure. And also, we didn't talk at all about this on the podcast, but thank you so much for your contribution to American Murderer and giving me such a, you are such a great resource to screenwriters, especially screenwriters in the crime genre. So thank you for all the great work that you do and for helping my movie.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Appreciate it.